Martin Luther King Jr. speaking at a podium. His voice, his cadence, his gestures, saying something that he never said. Now that's not a technology problem. From where I sit, that's a problem with a bunch of people's memory. And I want to talk about how we got here. Because we lost Martin Luther King in 1968. We've been continuing to lose him more and more ever since. Now, before anybody in the comments tries to come for me, this video is not me telling y'all that y'all can't laugh. I'm not coming in with a list of rules about how to treat Black history. That's not what this is. What I want to do is trace something. Because what's happened to Martin Luther King's image over the last 30 years didn't happen by accident. It happened in steps. And each step moved us a little further from the actual man, the actual stakes, and the actual price he paid. I'm a journalist. I spent most of this decade in newsrooms learning how images get constructed and how they get distorted. I'm also a playwright and a spoken word artist, so I care about how language shapes memory. And what's been done to MLK's language is something I think we need to name out loud. So let's walk the timeline. It starts with two brothers, a coma and a very different world. That's right, millennials. I'm talking about
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you get out of that room this instant.
The Boondocks is a series known for sharp satire, cultural commentary, and memes before memes were memes. One of their now iconic episodes, Return of the King, envisioned an alternate reality where MLK's assassination attempt left him in a coma that woke him up to a very different Black culture in 2006. He encounters the fruits and the complications of his generation's labor, and it ultimately results in this wild scene.
Will you ignorant just please shut the hell up?
Hilarious, cutting, and used as a mirror to show how weird things have gotten. This was one of the first major integrations of MLK's presence and image in modern day society. It was controversial, it was sharp, and it was insane. But in hindsight, it was also kind of a high standard because unfortunately things go downhill quick from that point. The 2010s started to see the flyers, the edited photos, Martin Luther King in a throwback jersey, Martin Luther King with a chain on, Martin Luther King with grills, and everybody laughed. I mean, including me, honestly. There's something about seeing this icon of seriousness placed inside of the most casual, irreverent imagery possible that is genuinely funny. I get it. Like somebody put MLK in a fitted cap, and I, for one, was not ready for how well it worked visually. But here's something I want us to sit with for a second. Because comedy isn't neutral, it never is. What comedy does, especially when it's aimed at an icon, is it shrinks the distance between you and them. It makes them smaller so they feel more approachable, and sometimes that's a gift. Sometimes humanizing a figure who's been placed on an unreachable pedestal is the right thing to do. But Martin Luther King was not on an unreachable pedestal because people loved him too much. He was on that pedestal because it's easier to worship a man than to actually do what he asked you to do.
You're about in school.
Martin Luther King Jr.
Martin Luther King Jr. What'd he do?
He died for our sins.
No, that was...
And here's a fact that most people don't know. A Gallup poll from 1966, 2 years before his assassination, showed that Martin Luther King had a 63% disapproval rating among white Americans. He was not universally beloved during his lifetime. The sanitized, universally admired version of King emerged largely after his death, and it emerged largely because it was useful. We turned a man they hated into a man they could sell t-shirts with. That's not a sign of progress. That is a sign of good marketing.
I really should have approvals over this kind of thing.
Phase 2 is where it gets more interesting and more dangerous. Somewhere around the mid-2010s, the internet discovered Martin Luther King quotes. And I don't mean actual Martin Luther King quotes. I mean the quotes we decided he probably would have said if he was alive today and very online. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Real quote, he said that. The time is always right to do what's right. Real, he said that. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. Real, said it. I actually used that quote for my senior photo in my yearbook. I have a dream that one day my son will be able to get 30% off on mattresses this President's I have a dream that one day my son will be able to get 30% off on mattresses this President's Day weekend. That one is not real. But at this point, you might have seen something like it on a graphic somewhere.
This MLK Day, we here at the Mattress Shed also have a dream.
But actually, the fake quotes are less damaging than what we did with the real ones. Because we started taking the real quotes and stripping them of every bit of their original context. The most famous example is the content of their character line from the I Have a Dream speech. That line has been used by people who actively oppose everything King stood for to argue against affirmative action, racial equity policy, and civil rights legislation.
He didn't want people judged on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character.
By the content of their character.
The content of their character.
The content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Don't judge us by the color of our skin.
Here's what that speech actually said. King called for the nation to make good on what he described as a promissory note of equality. A note that had been, in his words, returned marked insufficient funds. The entire speech ties the dream to economic justice, to the urgency of immediate action, to the unfinished work of a country that had made a promise it hadn't kept. The content of their character line lives inside a speech demanding racial systemic change, not patience, not gradualism, not even colorblindness. People took one line from one speech and used it to argue against the very legislation King was marching for when they killed him. That is deliberate erasure, using a direct quote. James Baldwin said it in 1968. I don't know what most white Americans feel, but I can say that when the king of a country gets murdered, something has gone wrong with the country. Something has gone terribly wrong. And part of what happened after King's murder was the construction of a version of him that could no longer threaten anyone. They silenced him once with a bullet. Then, they've been silencing him ever since by turning his words into greeting cards. Phase 3 is the one that hits different depending on your politics. So I want to be honest about the facts that this happened on all sides. The right co-opted King to argue that racial disparities don't require racial remedies. The content of their character misread. The claim that King would have opposed affirmative action. The idea that his legacy is about colorblindness rather than equity. But the left co-opted him too. We put his face on every cause, every march, every movement, whether or not King would have endorsed that specific frame. We flattened him into a universal symbol of justice so broad that he stopped being a specific human being with a specific, costly set of beliefs. Here's the speech nobody puts in the Instagram carousel. On April 4th, 1967, exactly 1 year to the day before he was assassinated, Martin Luther King gave a speech called Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence. In it, he explicitly called America the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. He was talking about the Vietnam War, about American imperialism, about the ways military spending is being used to justify the abandonment of domestic poverty programs. Major newspapers, the New York Times and the Washington Post, condemned the speech. It cost him enormous mainstream support. That speech is almost never featured in the popular image of King. The king that gets quoted on Instagram wasn't anti-war. He wasn't calling out the American empire. He wasn't talking about economic redistribution and the guaranteed annual income he championed in his final years. That king is too complicated, too inconvenient. So we took the dream and left the man. We inherited the version of him that made us most comfortable. And then we get to where we are now. 2024 and 2025 brought something even crazier. AI-generated Martin Luther King content. Not just quotes attributed to him, videos, audio, his voice, his cadence, his physical presence, generated and placed on top of words he never said.
I have a dream. Actually, never mind. I don't.
The Grills photo asks you to imagine. The misquote asks you to believe something outrageous. But the AI videos show you something. It creates visual and audio evidence. And when most people are already struggling to distinguish real footage from generated footage, when deepfakes are everywhere and trust in media is at historic lows, a realistic AI recreation of Martin Luther King saying something is not just a meme. It is a fabrication with the ability and the power of testimony behind it.
Sir, you still need to pay for those.
I have a dream that one day these will be free of charge. Today is that day.
Research from MIT and the Reuters Institute found that the average person correctly identifies AI-generated video content at rates barely above chance. That means that most people can't reliably tell what's real from what's generated, especially when the content features somebody that they already recognize. And here's the thing that stays with me. King was assassinated. We can't ask him what he thinks. We can't get a quote from his press team. He died at 39 years old, and every word he left behind is now available to be remixed, recycled, and regenerated by anyone with a subscription to the right software. That goes beyond satire and parody and into the most sophisticated form of erasure we've seen yet. Because it doesn't just take away his words, it puts new ones inside of his mouth. It took 50 years to go from I have a dream to I have a deep fake, and I'm not laughing at that one. So, I've been building to this. The grills, the misquotes, the co-opting, the AI videos, these aren't random. They're all expressions of the same thing. America has always needed a version of Martin Luther King it can live with comfortably. The actual Martin Luther King. The one who was under FBI surveillance for years. The one who was wiretapped. The one J. Edgar Hoover called the most dangerous Negro in America. The one who was murdered while supporting a sanitation worker strike over wages. That king is a lot. That king asks a lot. And those FBI files are public record now. Under J. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau conducted a years-long surveillance and harassment campaign against King through a program called COINTELPRO. In 1964, 2 years before that Gallup poll showed his 63% disapproval rating, the FBI sent King an anonymous letter urging him to himself. That happened. Those documents exist. You can read them. So we do what people have always done with difficult truth. We smooth it, we crop it, we find the parts that make us feel good, and we run with that. And now we have the technology to even go a step further, to literally put whatever we want in his voice and make it look like he said it. And the generation growing up right now, the people who are 17, 20 years old, they have never known a Martin Luther King who wasn't also a meme. They have never known him as a flesh and blood human being who was afraid, who doubted, who was surveilled by his own government and killed for what he believed. My mindset changed on it all through my job, by the way. One of my jobs is shooting commercials for companies and businesses. And in 2024, I shot an ad for the National Civil Rights Museum. If you don't know, King was murdered in Memphis at the Lorraine Motel, and years later, they made a museum to commemorate his impact and the long struggle toward equality at that very location. Because I was behind the camera, the museum did something that they never do. They opened up the very balcony he was standing on when he was murdered and let me get an angle for the ad. And standing there forced me not to think about the man from my school book. It forced me not to think about his name on streets and buildings. It made me think of a father, a human, packed with goals and contradictions. As I stood there, I remembered this was a living person. Cornel West wrote in Race Matters, "To engage seriously with King's life and work is to be forced to confront the depths of American racism and the radical depths of genuine democracy. That is exactly why the sanitized King is so useful and the actual King is so rarely taught." West was writing in 1993. 30 some odd years later, we have tools that can generate his face and voice from scratch, and we still haven't reckoned with the actual man. When you can turn a revolutionary into a mascot, you replace him. So, what am I saying? I'm not telling you to stop laughing. I'm not telling you to put your phone down every time you see a King meme and write an essay about historical context. That is performative and that is unrealistic. What I'm asking for is something smaller and more difficult at the same time. Know who he actually was. Read the letter from the Birmingham jail. The whole thing. Look up the Beyond Vietnam speech. Find out what he was fighting in Memphis before he was killed and why. Because the best way to honor someone is to actually know them. Not the image of them that's easy to carry around. Not the quote on the poster. Not the AI voice saying something for TikTok. The man. The cost, the unfinished work. That's the thing the meme can't hold. And for the younger generation, the more the meme gets shared, the more the man gets forgotten. We can't keep doing that.
In what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation,